Hi. So today I'm going to just give a small video kind of explanation of chapter 2 of Steven Pinker's book, um, The Sense of Style. And let's see, there you go. And hopefully that's not reversed in the video. And I'm going to talk about some of the principles in this particular chapter called Window onto the World, and how this will help your writing conceptually, how you can approach the enigmatic reader that's out there that you can't really quantify, that oftentimes becomes a problematic element in the reader's experience. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'll probably do a little bit of reading from the actual chapter itself, and then what we'll do is and then I'll kind of like explain what Pinker is actually talking about here in terms of our class. I don't plan on this video being very long. The chapters themselves are pretty heavy in this book, although approachable. And I think if you specifically spend time in this chapter here, A Window onto the World, it's going to increase your ability to engage an audience a lot better. So I'm just going to start off with one of the things that he says, and it's important that we understand that as Pinker is talking about this, he's advocating for what we call classic prose, and this is he's going to typify what classic prose is, and then he's going to say how it actually ameliorates there's the word, ameliorates our writing in terms of the academy, in terms of bureaucracy or bureaucratic writing, legal writing, many of our straightforward prose or not so straightforward prose. And what he's really kind of attacking here, and I would say justly, bringing or calling to light the problem within professional prose or even within the academy, is this sense of stuffiness, the sense of talking above or condescension to the reader, as opposed to actually what writing should do is as a communicative that's embarrassing, communicative endeavor to bridge the world of knowledge to the not only the masses, that sounds very socialistic, but to bridge this kind of like elements of knowledge in a way that is understandable, that is complete, that actually captures an idea and shares it forth to the world, as opposed to trying to cover it in a pretentious dust heap of words that will ultimately just bury the truth. And so we'll just kind of get into what he says here. I'm just reading on page 28. So he says in this first full paragraph here, he says, "We enjoy none of this give and take when we cast our bread upon the waters by sending a written missive out into the world. The recipients are invisible and inscrutable, and we have to get through to them without knowing much about them or seeing their reactions. At the time that we write, the reader exists only in our imaginations. Writing is above all an act of pretense. We have to visualize ourselves in some kind of conversation or correspondence or oration or soliloquy and put words into the mouth of the little avatar who represents us in this simulated world." This is very similar to what I'm doing right now. I'm actually projecting myself into the World Wide Web of YouTube, hoping that there's some audience that will actually receive this information, not judge too harshly, but also understand that my intent is to show something, a truth that I found about, in this case, about prose writing, that is very beneficial for us to understand. In this case, writing is an act of pretense. That means we have to imagine, we have to pretend the audience is there. We have to pretend that the audience needs or wants or desires to know what we have to say. And in that pretensive action, we have to act like what we have to say is important enough for that particular imaginative person to spend their time with us. So he says a lot of things in this chapter. I'm just going to continue reading on just a little bit. The key to good style, far more than obeying any list of commandments, is to have a clear conception of the make-believe world in which you're pretending to communicate. That's something that we forget, oftentimes, especially in writing for school. A lot of writing in school is what I like to call faux writing. It's not real writing, mostly because who you're writing for is the teacher, and the teacher is going to establish, or actually their job is to judge the quality of your writing. And there's only certain prescriptions that that teacher has at their disposal to non-subjectively judge your writing. And I would say that a lot of that writing, or a lot of that judgment, is actually subjective. Even if it's from a rubric, it's still subjective, because if you think about, like, oh yeah, I'm going to use a lot of adjectives in my writing, or I'm going to use a lot of big words, well, that writing actually becomes less clear. It becomes monstrous in its uptake. And it becomes less appealing to a general audience, and actually doesn't accomplish its job in conveying the information. And so what happens is, in school, or in writing in general, and particularly at the secondary level, is that what we have is writing to the degree that it's so pretensive. It's such a pretense that it never actually becomes real, genuine writing. And so as a writer, you have to pretend that there's an audience beyond, especially in education, beyond the teacher, a purpose, a person who will genuinely benefit from what you have to say and the work you're going to put in to saying it. And so that's something that we have to understand, is that writing, as Stephen King says in his book on writing, it's not just an act of telepathy. Writing is telepathy, but I would go on beyond what King says, that it's not just an act of telepathy. It's because it transcends time and space, and kind of like, I could write something today, and then 20 years from now, I could actually pick up my own writing and have a message sent to me directly, or to someone else, minds connecting through space and time. But it is more than that, because if the writing isn't clear, what we get is just noise. What we don't get telepathy, we get confusion. And so a lot of that clarity, a lot of the imaginative work that goes into writing happens long before you put pencil to paper, pen to paper, or finger to keystroke, or to key on the computer. This is something that has to happen in the mind first. So he goes on to say, so so we're going to read a fairly large paragraph here. This is at the bottom of 28. It says, the guiding metaphor of classic style is seeing the world. The writer can see something that the reader has not yet noticed, and he orients the reader's gaze so that she can see it for herself. The purpose of writing is presentation, and its motive is disinterested truth. It succeeds when it aligns language with the truth. The proof of success being clarity and simplicity. The truth can be known, and is not the same as the language that reveals it. Prose is the window onto the world. The writer knows the truth before putting it into words. He is not using the occasion of writing to sort out what he thinks, nor does the writer of classic prose have to argue for the truth. He just needs to present it. That is because the reader is competent and can recognize the truth when she sees it, as long as she is given an unobstructed view. The writer and the reader are equals, and the process of directing the reader's gaze takes the form of a conversation. So I'd like to talk about frames real quick. Okay, so what Pinker suggests here is that the writing process involves, from the writer's perspective, the ability to establish a frame, okay? And that frame is what encapsulates the truth, that capital truth, whether that truth is over here or over here, okay? And that framework, that view onto the world is like a window. It's like a movie camera. And Pinker brings up this metaphor as well, is that you direct the writer to see what you want, you direct the reader to see what you want the reader to see. And you take painstakingly, it's not a bullying or a manipulation of the reader, it's a conversation. You show them the metaphor, you show them the object, you show them the principle, the truth, and you give them various facets or directions by which to see that truth in the real world as it functions. And that doesn't actually argue for the truth one way or another. It actually helps the reader see the truth in a practical, unpretentious way to say that, hey, this is a truth. This is a principle I can apply. This is something valuable. This is something, oh my goodness, the writer took a lot of time and effort to demonstrate this truth. Something that was always there lying around. The writer simply gave us a clear, unobstructed view of that particular truth and how it functions in the world. And that's what Pinker is arguing for here. What he says is that the truth can be known. It's not obstructed. It's not disseminated all over the world to say that it's impossible to pick up, like rice thrown in the middle of the lawn, like in Mulan. You have to pick up every grain of rice, which can be, or at least seen as an impossibility. It's something that is there, something substantial, something that we can actually grasp. And the writer's job is to simply present it in a way that we can grasp it. So he goes on to say, the writer of classic prose must simulate two experiences: showing the reader something in the world and engaging her in conversation. So there's that framework idea. You show them, use examples, bring in allegories, metaphors, something that directs their gaze to the object that you want them to see, which that object is the truth, something that they're going to discover. And then through the act of conversation, the second part, you get the reader to understand that particular idea. And so it takes a lot of probing, a lot of back and forth, a lot of imaginative back and forth, because you don't necessarily have the reader in front of you. You have to anticipate what the reader's going to say or what the reader's going to question. And so this particular process involves imagining a lot of the particularly difficult stepping stones or tripping stones that might get in the way of the reader's understanding of what it is that you're trying to say. So a lot of writing is anticipatory. You're trying to say, okay, this truth, I've worked hard to find it for myself. I've done a lot of thinking. This is an idea that I want to actually bring out. How do I get someone else? And ideas are complicated things, says Chris Anderson, the CEO of TED. They're complicated things. And it's very, very difficult to take someone's idea from their mind and transmit it into the mind of someone else who has a completely different worldview. Your job is to point the camera, focus it in on the element of truth that you want to bring out, and then set up a couple more cameras and show different directions, different perspectives of that particular truth. So this back and forth is something that we anticipate as writers, and it helps us kind of set up that element. So I'm just going to keep reading here. So he goes on to compare classic style with other styles. So when we see classic style, that's the style he's advocating for. When he goes into other types of styles, these are the styles that they're not necessarily bad. They're just they're inappropriate, or at least they're not sufficient to argue or to write in the particular fields. And basically what he's saying is that there are times where you have to write with other styles, plain and simple. But the principles of classic style will give us an understanding of how to make our writing better. And that's what classic style is really going to do, is it's going to clarify and simplify what it is that we're trying to say for our reader's benefit. It's not to make the reader feel stupid. is to make the reader feel intelligent and that they can understand. And that's difficult to do in writing. So he says, classic style is not a contemplative or romantic style in which a writer tries to share his idiosyncratic, emotional, and mostly ineffable reactions to something. Nor is it a prophetic, oracular, or oratorical style, where the writer has the gift of being able to see things that no one else can, and uses the music of language to unite an audience. Less obviously, classic style differs from practical style, like the language of memos, manuals, term papers, and research reports. You might say, but Mr. Jenks, aren't you asking us to write research papers and term reports? The key is that the principles of classic style will actually augment your writing in those particular reports. Now remember that the primary function of those reports is all ensconced within the idea of faux writing, that fake writing that happens in education. I want you to break out of that habit. I want you to move beyond. I want you to have viable, true, living ideas that can live within these papers that you're writing, where you actually express an idea, in this case, a truth, that you want your reader to really combat with, really understand, really engage with. So he says, traditional style books such as Strunk and White are mainly guides to practical style. So I gave you access, or at least asked you to consider buying the Strunk and White manual. That's known as practical style or plain style. And so something that you need to understand is that those are great advice. It's going to help you with clarity and concision, but it's not necessarily classic style. Okay. In practical style, the writer and reader have defined roles: supervisor and employee, teacher and student, technician and customer, and the writer's goal is to satisfy the reader's need. Writing in practical style may conform to a fixed template, a 5-paragraph essay. Please don't write those. Actually, move beyond them. We're moving on into a totally different world of writing. So the 5-paragraph theme, kill it stone dead. Save it for your testing writings or your college essay, entrance essays. This is where we're going on and beyond. The best writing usually is written in classic style. Okay. And it is brief because the reader needs the information in a timely manner. So that's practical style. Practical style is brief. Writing in classic style, in contrast, takes whatever form and whatever length the writer needs to present an interesting truth. The classic writer's brevity comes from the elegance of his mind, never from the pressures of time or employment. I'm going to read that again because it's really important. The classic writer's brevity comes from the elegance of his mind, never from pressures of time or employment. So you can be brief, you can be succinct and to the point in your writing, but it should come not at the expense of the reader's understanding and never at the expense of some sort of looming due date. This is something that you take time, and it does take time and effort to really craft your written piece of prose for your audience, because the truth is worth the time and effort. And the elegance of your mind, and I'm not talking about wordiness, and I'm not talking about flowery language, I'm talking about your ability to convey the message, comes from the power of your own mind. Okay, so I'm going to finish up with these next couple of paragraphs. There's some great examples here. Classic style also differs subtly from plain style, where everything is in full view and the reader needs no help in seeing anything. In classic style, the writer has worked hard to find something worth showing and the perfect vantage point from which to see it. I'm going to read that point again because that's also important. In classic prose or classic style, the writer has worked hard to find something worth showing and the perfect vantage point from which to see it. Pinker's spot on here, okay? That means a lot of your work comes in the planning stage. That pretensive action where you're imagining the reader out there. You have a truth, an idea that you want to present, and you spend a lot of time figuring out just how to present it and why it's important. Classic style will always address that really evil muse that sits in the darkness of your closet with a big stogie and a leering grin that always says, after you've done writing your essay and just before you submit it, he says, "So what?" Classic style always addresses the so what from the very beginning. This is why this is important. This is the meaning, the significance of your writing. This is where all the work and effort actually comes from. And you're going to address it head on, right at the beginning. So he says, classic style, Thomas and Turner explain, is aristocratic, not egalitarian. Truth is available to all who are willing to work to achieve it. But truth is certainly not commonly possessed by all, and it is no one's birthright. Think about that. This is something that takes work for other people to understand. That means that just because you're seeking for simplicity and plainness and succinctness in your writing doesn't mean that you're going to dumb down the message. These can be very complicated ideas that you're conveying to your audience. Please make them complicated, but find the right framework by which to encapsulate the idea so that your reader can see it. Not just know it, but see it as a practical living truth in the world around them. It goes on to say, the reader may have to work hard to discern it, but her efforts will be rewarded. Classic style, Thomas and Turner explain. So here it is. The early bird gets the worm is an example of plain style. The early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese is classic. Because that idea, early bird gets the worm, that's plain and simple. That's a simple idea. The early bird gets the worm and the second mouse gets the cheese is classic. That's a whole different idea. That suggests something far deeper than just, I'm going to be the first person to get there just so I can get the worm. The second mouse gets the cheese, meaning it's all in the timing. It's all in the moment in which someone actually reaches out for that thing. The first one might get a trap. The second one just might get the cheese. So one of the things that you have to understand is that the different prose styles are not, and I'm quoting Pinker here, the different prose styles are not sharply demarcated, and many kinds of writing blend the different styles or alternate between them. So classic style, continuing on, classic style is an ideal. Not all prose should be classic, and not all writers can carry off the pretense. But knowing the hallmarks of classic style will make anyone a better writer. And it's the strongest cure I know for the disease that enfeebles the academic, bureaucratic, corporate, legal, and official prose. So one of the things I want you to take away from this, and Pinker is right, this is a style. This is a practical style, but it's more than that. It is a style by which you can use to help guide your writing. So you have to think, is my idea worth sharing? To quote Chris Anderson. Is it living? To quote Jordan Peterson. Is it something that I can frame to put into the mind of the reader? Is the reader going to be interested? What questions might she have? What questions will the reader pose? What's the correct angle by which to present this idea, this truth that I have found? And remember that writing, many people will say writing is a discovery. I will say that first draft writing is a discovery. The second draft, third draft, fourth draft, ad infinitum, those drafts are where you craft the idea. You always write the first draft for yourself. You always write the subsequent drafts for the audience, and that's where you want to go. This is what delineates the difference between high school writing, which is the stuff you pump out the night before it's due, and college level, and even beyond that, professional level writing, where the reader, the publishers, the editors, they understand the ideas that you're trying to convey because you took the work. You made the effort to pare down that idea to its raw and substantive properties. Not only so you could simplify the idea, that's not just a matter of dumbing down, but presenting that idea in its ideal form and place. Position the camera in the ideal position so that you can see it or so that the reader can see it. And to quote Pinker, writing in classic style makes, actually, so he says this in his chapter in Good Writing. He says, good writing makes the reader feel intelligent. Bad writing makes the reader feel like a dunce. This is not a place of condescension. This is a place of communication. And that active communication, that back and forth between the writer and the reader is essential. I challenge you to go ahead and read through that particular chapter, A Window onto the World. Pinker's going to delineate a lot of methods, a lot of ways in which you can establish that framework, that important framework in your prose, and help your own prose become a lot better and improve a lot more. Take the time to read it closely. Read it with a highlighter, read it with a pencil, make notes throughout it. And then the more important part, don't just take in the knowledge, but start acting on the knowledge. Actually apply it to your writing. You've got a paper coming up here this Friday. Please make sure, I believe it's this Friday. Yes, this Friday. Please make sure that you take the time to really, really reformat your prose so that your idea is central and that the reader can clearly see that idea. And not only that idea, but the ramifications surrounding that idea, because that's part of that framing element of writing. I wish you luck. If you have questions, please let me know. Send me an email or send me a comment and on Google Classroom, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks very much, guys. And I'll see you probably Friday, I think is when it comes out, or actually I'll send another quick video on Thursday. See you later. Bye.